Sorry. Let's try this presenter view, perhaps. We'll do it. There we go. Of course, we tested out the technology and did not have that problem last week. Anyway, some background. So commercial textbooks are expensive. That's something we've been aware of for quite some time. However, the cost of commercial textbooks has started to dip down a bit. And one reason that that is thought to be is that they're in competition with open educational resources. Another reason is that students are savvy as far as figuring out ways to save money and not have to buy a new textbook. They share textbooks with their peers. They buy older editions that are close enough to be able to handle the course. They simply just don't buy a textbook and do without, or they find a pirated copy online. So there's a lot of different ways students have figured out how to save money and not buy a brand new paper textbook, as was what the commercial publishers were hoping students would do, is just buy their new edition. So in response, and also with the new digital environment that we have in education now, commercial publishers have developed homework systems. Now, just to clarify, when I'm talking about online homework systems in this study, I'm not talking about something supported by an institutional learning management system. So this is not something like Blackboard or Canvas or any of those, Moodle, which are paid for by the institution, and the student does not have to pay additionally beyond their tuition and fees in order to access. I'm talking about commercial proprietary platforms where students need to pay for an access code so that they can access this homework system that is in addition to the learning management system, or sometimes in some courses is used as a replacement for an institutional learning management system. In the spring of 2020, when there was a lockdown and a rapid shift to virtual learning, there was a brief period where these products were free. So I received many emails. I know a lot of other faculty received emails. My dean even encouraged us to check it out. And it was genuinely out of concern of how can we best reach our students in this new virtual space when a lot of us were accustomed to face-to-face instruction. And because it was free, they were adopted. And then the process of figuring out the systems and getting everything set up was done. So when commercial publishers started charging again in fall 2022, many instructors just went along with continuing to require it because they'd already gotten used to the system and put in the work of organizing it for their course. So a little bit about what's on these online homework systems. So they include things that, you would expect with homework, things like quizzes, practice problems, exercise. Sometimes they have videos explaining things. They may have visuals. They may be more interactive in nature. And they typically provide immediate feedback to the student because it's automated. They require an access code to purchase that's specific to a student. It cannot be shared with another student, and it generally can't be sold. This access code is for temporary access. So usually, once the course is over, the student no longer can see any of those materials. This is different from a book where, you buy the book, you keep the book. This is more you rent a homework system. For some courses, you can only access graded assignments through these systems. So if you do not purchase an access code, you're not only missing out on opportunities to practice your skills and develop your understanding, you're also missing out on points that count towards your actual course grade. So I'd mentioned before that there was widespread adoption with spring of 2020. And here is a figure that illustrates just how often faculty are assigning these. So if you look at the top bar, what you'll see is that 67% of faculty in this survey reported that for at least one of their courses, they required students to purchase an access code to do their homework. And then 5% of faculty recommended it. So it was an auxiliary resource that wouldn't impact students' grade directly, but may impact it indirectly because they're missing out on opportunities to use those resources if they don't purchase the access code. So I started digging around and thinking, this is 74% of faculty are either requiring or recommending it. Surely there's some research that's being done on that. So when I first started looking around, this was generally the kind of studies I was finding was things more in the popular media. What I wanted to know was what students thought about these access codes. And I did come up with some editorials and commentaries. So this one it's a textbook monopoly because textbooks are, you know, requiring purchase to these homework systems. This one talks about how access code costs in particular tend to burden students. And this was a personal favorite, is having a digital access code one step closer to hell. The student did not hold back in her disdain for having to pay to do her homework. So these are not scholarly articles. So what do we already know as far as scholarly research? Well, there's really hardly any research studies published on this topic. And I could only find 4 that looked at comparisons of courses with having to purchase an access code for homework and without. In 3 studies, there were very similar grades, no noticeable differences for students having to pay, anywhere from $50 to $200 to do these access code homework systems. In one study, they actually found that the instructor created homework that was on the course learning management system was better in terms of grades. And they argued that it was because since the instructor did it, it was obviously more in line to what the instructor was teaching. Whereas the commercial publisher, unless if you are very much teaching, according to the textbook and following the textbook and having the textbook determine your course design, it's not going to be aligned to your course. However, the few studies I could find on student perspectives and their opinions about this show that they did think that these homework systems did offer opportunities for practice and for immediate feedback that did help their learning and engagement. Now, we don't know a lot about online homework systems in general, but we do know a lot about how financial costs impacts college students. It is the greatest barrier to achieving a post-secondary education. And there's so many barriers financially that we have no control over. I can't set the tuition rate for my college. I can reach out to my state legislatures but I can't tell the state how much funding to give. I can't tell alumni how much to donate, but I do have control, at least in my position at my institution, over how much the materials to take my course costs. So that's something to keep in mind as far as, thinking about the impact of these costs. Students as a whole deeply resent expensive course materials and report that they will get a poorer grade because they cannot or will not spend the money to buy a textbook. This can mean sometimes that, they don't have those resources to help them in the course, and they just take the hit to the grade. This is with textbooks, generally speaking. When we look at students who have been historically underserved in higher education, we see that 2 groups in particular, Latinx students and first-generation college students, report worse experiences due to expensive course materials. Again, we're generally talking about textbooks with this. So they say that this is more stressful for them and it impacts the grade negatively to a greater degree. So they're more likely to withdraw from a course. They report they're more likely to fail a course, get a worse grade in a course. Those are all academic repercussions. Okay, that leads me to the research study. Now that based on what we know about cost and how it impacts students, and the little bit we know about these online homework systems, which are incredibly common, let's find out what the students have to say about them. And so the first research question is just what are the overall experiences of post-secondary students with online homework systems? And then we're particularly interested, thinking about previous work on cost. How do experiences with online homework systems vary for students traditionally underserved in higher education? And in this particular study, we focused on first-generation college students and racially minoritized college students in looking at those who have been traditionally underserved. This study was guided by the SCOPE framework for open education research. In the SCOPE framework, open education research can be organized under the concepts of social justice, cost, outcomes, perceptions, and engagement. This is considered a development of the traditional COO framework, the cost, outcomes, use, perceptions framework, in that social justice is placed front and center at the beginning and explicitly the focus of this research framework. We also, instead of use, thought more that engagement is an important variable to consider, or important concept to consider, in that do we really want students just to use the materials, or are we interested in how they truly engage in the material? With each of these concepts, they are integrated with existing theories in social justice, pedagogy, motivation, cognitive science, and engagement theories. So these are all steps we took as a research team to address the concern that open education research was under-theorized. And then this was also intended to provide inspiration to focus on social justice explicitly. In this particular study, this is how we had the SCOPE framework inform our inquiry. So in terms of social justice, we are concerned about cost and negative effects on grades, but we're doing an intentional examination of historically underserved groups in higher education. Following quant-crit guidelines and using quantitative methodologies to better understand the experiences of racially minoritized individuals, we looked at first generation and race separately so as not to confound the effects of race by looking at college generation status. We looked at cost in terms of financial expense and emotional cost, outcomes for perceived learning, perceptions, the perceived quality of these homework systems, and engagement is frequency of use. To conduct this study, we recruited almost 1,000 participants through an online study recruitment platform known as Prolific. I am a big fan of Prolific. It is marketed as an ethical option that is an alternative to, say, Amazon MTurk, and that there are minimum payment requirements to ensure that research participants are reimbursed in a fair manner. And we restricted to the United States, mostly because that's where my area of expertise is the United States. And also we asked questions about financial cost and wanted to make sure everyone was using the same currency. The race and ethnic distribution of our sample was actually quite nicely aligned with the demographics of the United States. And in terms of college generation data, over a third of our participants were first generation. So this ended up being a very nice sample size with appropriately sized subgroups. In terms of race and ethnicity, we do recognize these are not the only races and ethnicities. These were the only 4 large enough to create their own categories in order to do quantitative analysis. In the survey, we had items that asked about cost, outcomes, and perceptions. So for cost, How much do you spend on homework systems? What are your academic repercussions due to financial cost? What is the stress due to the expense? And what do you think a fair price of a hypothetical online homework system that we mentioned is? For outcomes, we have perceived learning benefits. Given the nature of the survey with such a diverse, broad sample across so many different potential courses, we can't really look at their actual course outcomes. For perceptions, we had some open-ended items about advantages and disadvantages as far as quality questions and engagement. We asked, do you actually use homework systems when you're assigned to use them? So what were the results in terms of cost? Almost 80% have to buy an access code to do the homework for at least one of their courses. So you can see that this is very widespread and aligns with that 74% statistic of with faculty that I mentioned earlier. There's an average of 1.27 courses per term with an access code. Just as a note, we didn't really control for how many courses they took, but on average, the students were full-time students. The average cost of access to codes in their current term, the academic term that they took the study, was almost $116. A large percentage, over 3/4, said that the cost of access codes is stressful for them. Coming up with that money that is typically not covered by financial aid is difficult. Almost 30% said they get a worse grade in a course, or they have gotten, or they expect to get a worse grade because they could not afford an access code, which just makes me pause. 30%. That is a huge percentage of students who are going to be underperforming because they have to pay to do their homework. 16% have dropped a course because they started the course and then realized they couldn't afford the homework that they needed to be able to do the course. Again, huge financial cost to both the student and the individual if this is during a drop period where they, beyond the drop period where they typically get their tuition reimbursed. And over 6% have indicated that they have failed a course because they could not afford to do the homework. Not surprisingly, I remember doing this as a student, checking out which course had the expensive materials. They have purposely avoided a course because it required an access code. I actually know, anecdotally, my stepson dropped a course for that reason. He texted me from the bookstore saying, "What's this?" And I explained, "Oh, you have to pay to do your homework." He said, "Forget that, I'll take something else." So we asked, what's the fair price of an online homework system? And we gave the example of MyLab statistics. We did that because we chose statistics because this is a course where anecdotally it seems that, well, for one thing, it's a bottleneck course. It's a difficult course. It's one where students would likely appreciate having any extra practice and materials. And I have heard faculty argue that this is a course that students should have to pay to get the homework systems because the homework systems are so good, apparently. Probably not shocked anybody. My statistics course is all OER and instructor created homework. As far as how reasonable the price of $160 is, students thought, that does not look so reasonable if you think about the midpoint being at 6. And the fair price was about 1/3 of the actual price for the course. So that's looking at students overall. Let's look at students based on college generation status. Here we can see a dramatic shift and difference in terms of those negative academic repercussions. So first generation students were way more likely to report avoiding a class because of the access code. Their grade was hurt because of the access code, that they dropped a class. And I mean, look at the chilling percentage, quite frankly, for failing a course. We're talking about students who, due to institutional and other barriers, not understanding the hidden curriculum, all these things, they're as a group less likely to graduate to begin with, and now we have them more likely to fail a course. In terms of other cost variables, first generation students reported paying more for access codes than continuing generation students. Something I'm going to be touching on a little bit later. As far as how often they have to purchase access code, that statistic was fairly similar, but I think it's just because it's such a big increment from 1 to 2 access codes when we only had an average of 1. And they had similar estimates of a fair price of an access code, but they are paying more. Now let's talk about racially minoritized students. In terms of stress, we see that, unexpected to me, Black students reported less stress. And I'll explain why that may be later on. As far as their grade being hard from not being able to afford an access code, the group of students who identified as Latinx or Hispanic had almost a 50% rate where they said their grade was hurt. And then for failing a course, we can see that Latinx or Hispanic students are disproportionately more likely to fail a course because of the cost of an access code. So in terms of number of courses with an access code this semester, we see that Black students report a higher number of courses with access codes. This sort of puzzled me, but I think part of the reason they report access codes as less stressful could be that it just seems to be more of the norm for this particular group. And we also see, in terms of the reasonable price, that Black students reported that the homework systems are more reasonable and that that's a fair price. Oh goodness, a minute. Okay, 5 minutes. Let me see. So as far as student, I'm going to skip ahead to advantages and then some of my discussion. Here are some of the advantages the students wrote. I will say, for the most part, none of these advantages seem specific to purchased homework systems. They generally seem to be, they like being able to do their homework online. Like, there's a convenience factor, there's an automated feedback factor. Those are things that they like. The extra resources, though, that may only be available in a commercial system may be seen as beneficial. So for disadvantages, these are the ones that I can share because they don't contain expletives. There was quite a bit of cursing from students in their attitudes towards Pearson specifically. But that the systems don't work well, that they're not fair, that they disadvantage students who are already disproportionately disadvantaged. And quite a few students mentioned cheating. And that's something I really want to highlight, is how easy it is to cheat on these without even trying. Like, I was trying just to find information about online homework systems, and I kept getting websites like these telling me, here, pay for access to our cheating website and you can get all the answers. Every answer to every commercial homework system is online. So I'm really not sure how much this is really going to help students who, if they have plenty of money, I mean, you got to admit that has probably been pretty tempting, especially if they know the professor isn't actually looking at the homework that's just automated. So with thinking about traditionally underserved students, we see that first generation students are more likely to have to pay for access and are more likely to experience negative repercussions. We also see that Black students are more likely to have to pay for access to homework. Now, obviously, nobody looks at their class and individually assigns first generation and Black students to have to pay for their homework, and then the continuing generation and the other racial and ethnic groups to not. Like, that is not a thing you do. You assign homework at the course level. So my working hypothesis here is that publishers are particularly targeting institutions that serve more students who are first generation and serve more students who are Black, and that is leading to these students being disproportionately assigned these homework systems. A quick touch on limitations, where we didn't ask about internet status, and later that was a duh moment, because something like 10% of college students in the United States don't have reliable access to internet. We only looked at the United States for reasons I explained, and Prolific, well, it's a very good platform for a lot of things. You tend to get quality data for the most part. These are students where they're kind of professional research participants, so there's a possible bias with the sample. This also might be more likely to be less affluent students who are logging on and doing research studies for money. And just some take-home points, I'd like to emphasize that there are open homework systems, but they're not nearly at the scale and use of commercial systems. So that wasn't even something I really asked about, because I don't think students would even really know if they were using an open homework system. And I would argue that future development in OER would really benefit by thinking more about how to develop these homework systems. Right. I would like to acknowledge my co-author, Allison Kelly, who is also at the University of North Dakota, and thank the Hewlett Foundation for funding this research. And here is my journal article. It is, of course, open access. And any details that I glossed over in my talk should be available either explained there, or I have the data openly available as well. So how am I, did I finish in time? Sorry,
No, you're good. Everything is wrapping up nicely. We have some time for Q&A still. Thank you very much, Virginia and
okay.
Paola. Wonderful keynotes. Very insightful, very insightful. So if anybody has a question that they would like me to pose to Virginia or Paola, please put that in the chat. I'm going to start. I would like to read out one of the comments that came into the chat and ask a question based on that comment. So this is from Jeff Gallant. There's so much to unpack about online homework systems, from what determines quality and therefore are tempting, um, referencing a different participant, Audra, and why they're so ubiquitous. If time is the benefit, is it because everyone is accordingly pressed for time? And this reminded me of a connection in Paula's keynote, where she brought up what is the best way to get from point A to point B versus a more traditional, modern, I guess, focus of it being the most efficient way. She put in a emphasis on the best way. And I'm wondering if that is kind of the struggle that Jeff is meaning, that educators are going through, is that they are being pressed for time, and so they are maybe not going through the best way, and rather taking the more efficient way. What is your perspective on that? And what, I guess, what would you say to faculty who are trying to make the decision between if it's the best for their students in their needs as the faculty as well?
Well, I just wanted to, uh, that's an excellent connection, by the way. And I did want to quickly respond to Jason. As far as the sweary ones, if you are on TikTok or YouTube, I have some videos that I put together where I shared those, in a less formal space. So where students really did not hold back. As far as how to convince faculty, that is, I think that's the next step in this. I first just wanted to get student voices and to get a baseline understanding of how this affects students before delving into the question of why faculty are assigning these homework systems, and especially at such a large scale. And my own personal experience. So before I got into open education, I got lured to assign my students an online homework system. I did it for one summer session and never again because it was such a bad experience. I had so many complaints from my students. And I also had the problem where when the course was over, the grades disappeared. So I had students where they said you made a mistake entering grades, and I had over 200 students. And yeah, I might have. So, but I had no way to verify. And the company was like, yeah, the data's gone. So even before I got into open, I was like, well, never again. And yeah, I'm not dealing with that again. So I'm honestly curious how these could be positive experiences, especially when faculty have little control about what they are able to offer as far as homework when they do these systems. And when students have questions, faculty a lot of times don't know how to answer. That was also in the feedback, was that when I asked my professor for help, they didn't understand the question. I would like to do a follow-up study, but I'm thinking about how to do this appropriately because I don't want to come across as judgmental. I understand that faculty have, I, I'm, I would like to go in with the mindset that faculty are proceeding with the best interests of the students in mind. So to get a better idea of why faculty do this, and then from there, work with faculty to develop different systems, I think would require a whole other study. I also think that a lot of initiatives for converting to or adopting open textbooks would be well served by providing similar funding to switch away from commercial homework systems. Because at least in my institution, until I spoke up about this, the assumption was we'll just do the same, please switch to an OER textbook approach and we'll help you with some money to compensate for the time and energy.
That is, I want to also share just this week, the dean of the university library that I work at was contacted directly by a student expressing that they could not afford the access code that was required for their course. Is there anything that we could do? There was, as a library, we could not do anything directly at that moment, but we did offer some information to try to help both the student and the professor. So this, I'm glad that this was studied. I'm glad you did this study.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask Paula as well as Virginia. In Paula's presentation, she talked about the mind of the beginner, and she also brought up how ants have a third stomach that is third stomach, second stomach, that is specifically meant for storing information with the intention, storing food and information about that food with the intention of sharing it with their ant peers. And so my question is, what do you think would be some advice that you would give to practicing educators to help them adopt that mindset of automatically being prepared to share?
Um, I don't have any advice, to be honest. It's more like an invitation because I'm learning through practice myself together with the peers. what I'm discovering through this path is that the editable format is really the first step that everyone should choose, because editable format makes you feel somehow powerless because you are losing control on your resource, but you already lost control of your resource once you put it into any digital device, right? And you've been talking about homeworks, Virginia, and well, so the approach is the opposite, I would say, which is the same that I adopt when I have the opportunity to talk with faculty members. I try to completely put them their legs up, their feet up, and their heads down in the approach. Think about sharing homeworks with solutions already. Think about that. Think about the learning experience of students using that as their way of studying. Put the responsibility on them, on their own learning experience. And this can work while they are studying, not when you have to assess or you have to grade. I understand that. And there was also another question from Apurva in the chat asking what is happening around that in Italy or in Europe. I'm not sure that I know what's happening everywhere in every single institution, but what I can tell you is that most of all during the COVID period, and most of all in Italy, since we've been affected so largely, and we had to jump online like night and day immediately, there was a lot of focus on controlling students and having cameras put through smartphones on your back so that you can check that no one else was in the room or behind your desk, like all the privacy issues completely forgotten. And we are in Europe, so privacy is one of the big issues. But was it effective? No, because students, and I say this with admiration for students, were smarter. They would find their way through these tools anyway. Okay, but as teachers or as university decision makers, is it our priority to make students smarter, to find the alternative way, or is it our main purpose to help them while they go through their learning path and finish their university path being as equipped as possible with skills to face the working life and to face life itself? So maybe in this second approach, and that was putting teachers upside down, the suggestion was, why don't you ask them to do the homeworks together and then you grade them individually anyway, and they can learn there that they are considered reliable, and also if they fake the result, they will know that they faked it. Okay, so it's a learning lesson anyway. It's different from that's why I was saying it's like asking everyone, and I understand that it takes a lot of energy to do that. It's like changing the mindset. It's like a shift in culture. Is which kind of citizens do we want to have in the future? Do we want them to be responsible citizens who take the responsibility of what they do and who are keen to admit they don't know something yet, so they have to take the longer path before they reach the point? Or do we want to encourage an approach where the fastest way, whichever way it is fine?
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think we have some comments in the chat that show that was a very eye-opening perspective to share. Thank you. So we need to move on to our next presentation. So thank you so much, Virginia and Paula. I appreciate you so much, and we'll be in touch. We'll chat in a little bit.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
you.
Enjoy your day.
Thank you.